The problem with reviewing cars these days is that there's just never anything new or interesting to talk about, so you just end up trying to find different ways of saying the same stuff over and over again. Just makes it kind of difficult, you know? Audi e-tron, big electric car, big. Yep, electric cars. Now, everybody's probably going to have one of these within the next couple of generations, or almost everybody. And already there's a good chance that you've got a friend or a friend of a friend who has a Nissan Leaf, or maybe you've got one. But the reality is there's still a lot more niche than you probably think. We can prove that with data. So according to the SMMT, that's the Car Society or Summit, about 12,000 pure electric cars were sold in the UK in the first half of this year. Sounds like a lot, right? But compare it to the 1.2 million petrol and diesel cars sold in the same period. It's also about the same number of Corsas and Fiestas that were sold in the month of June, 1 month. We're still range anxious when it comes to these things, it seems. But the problem's not just that archetypal narrative of, you know, being on the M1 at 2 o'clock in the morning and your battery running out all of a sudden. There's also the whole charging issue. Charging both ways, the plug bit and the cost bit. Let's do the plug bit first. You can charge this big fella using a 150 kilowatt supercharger. And as it happens, BP's just announced that it's going to stick some of them in about 50 locations throughout the UK before the end of this year. Obviously that's not a huge number, but if you do happen to live reasonably close to one of those places, then you'll be able to charge the whole battery in under an hour. Alas, most e-tron owners will be looking at a 7 kilowatt wall box installation, which is a 13-hour charge. Overnight, in other words. But really, assuming you treat your car charging cable better than your phone one, you know, you don't keep giving it to your kids so they can lose it, this really shouldn't be an issue. You see, according to the RAC, the average commuter trip's only about 10 miles. And even if you're in that group that does lots of miles in their car, the so-called miles high club,
I should tell this joke?
Probably not.
You're still not doing that many a day, really, when you break it down. But of course, we're all chimps, right? And feelings are much more important than facts. And there is something highly off-putting in a very real way about the thought of a 13-hour fill-up as opposed to a 3-minute one at the petrol station. I don't have the answer to that. Okay, I do. It's the same advice that Jesus got off his dad when he hit 30. Just get over yourself, get organised. But also,
Bunsen burner, nice little earner, hence the...
Now this of course depends on how much your electricity is costing you, but broadly Audi reckons that it's about 2 to 3 pence per mile to drive one of these things. Compare that to, say, an Audi Q7 diesel, basic one, which even if you're really careful and you manage to scrape 40 miles per gallon out of it, somehow, will cost you 15 pence per mile in fuel. There's also the whole VED thing, you pay less of it with an e-tron, and most alluringly, if you're a company car driver and you wait until April 2020 to buy one when the new tax rules activate, that rate drops from 16% to just 2%, which will save you an absolute fortune every month. In real terms, that's the difference between the Audi Q7 diesel owner paying £8,000 or £9,000 a year and the e-tron owner paying just a few hundred. It's massive. Too many numbers. Getting boring. But just one more thing, and this is quite important. You will need those tax savings because this thing is proper expensive. Let's just do the Q7 comparison for a kick-off, and there's 20 grand difference there. Also, the e-tron's list price means that while your friend of a friend who's got a Nissan Leaf is paying nothing in road tax, BED, whatever it's called now, you do, because you have to pay the premium tax because your car costs more than 40 grand. Having said that, this isn't the only massive electric car in the market, and this is pretty much the going rate. Also, while we're here, it probably goes without saying that with an e-tron you get a lot of standard equipment. Full gamut of fully digital instrument displays, cameras and sensors everywhere, sat-nav obviously, and aircon, dual zone of course, which you'll never turn on because you'll be panicking that it's going to drain the battery instantly. It's boiling in here like. Just go to Audi's website if you really need to know everything that this car has, but there's a lot of it. Although what you don't get as standard is the best thing about this car, or possibly the worst thing about this car. I haven't really decided yet.
No matter what shape the car of the future might be, a few features seem predetermined, like 4 wheels and a steering wheel. Or maybe not. At Mercedes, joystick control seems to be a real option for the future.
Yep, Audi has swooped in and stolen Mercedes' thunder by becoming the first manufacturer to put a joystick into a production car. Sadly, it doesn't drive the car, they've just stuck it where the wing mirror should be. Did you ever hear that story about how NASA spent millions of dollars developing a pen that would work in space, and then Russia came along and just gave its astronauts a pencil? Now that NASA story is total bollocks apparently, but it's still the best way to illustrate these things, the wing mirrors. Or is it? I mean, sure, they cost about 1,200 quid as an option, and you'll pay at least 600 quid to get one replaced if somebody wipes one out, but they do have some benefits over the boring old wing mirror. For a start, they're more aerodynamic, which helps this brick-like SUV cut through the air that little bit more easily. Also, they're wide angle, so you do see more in the screen than you would if you were looking at a standard piece of glass, or at least it seems that way anyway. Well, having said that, it does take quite a long time to get used to looking at the screen and not the joystick. Obviously your instinct is to go there outside the car. It's better on that side because you're looking in that general direction anyway. Now, I'm not going to go as far as to say that's unsafe. You will get used to it eventually, I'm sure, but it's just a little thing worth mentioning. It is pretty cool. Like, I don't know if you can see this, but you just have to touch the screen to adjust the camera. It's really cool. And the fact is that people are impressed by these things and want to talk about them. Whatever the pros and cons, they do make this car tangibly more interesting, and for me, that makes them worth the money. Because otherwise, the Audi e-tron is surprisingly characterless. Yeah, so there's that, right? I can't make my mind up about this thing, which I realise is failure 101 when it comes to reviewing a thing. Audi has made this deliberately conventional, and that is a strategy designed to make it easy for somebody who's going to buy like a Q7 or any big SUV to get into this and for it to feel normal. I understand that, right? But personally, I want the opposite. I want my electric car to be a bit mad or a bit futuristic, or ideally both. See BMW i3 for details. Tesla gets that thing right, okay? So the Model X, for example, you can make the indicators sound like a fart. And you can play racing games on the screen using the steering wheel when you're parked up. And then obviously there's the whole Elon Musk association, which gives it that extra veneer of mentalism.
It's not really, they don't really care about the existential nature of a pit. You just say like, pit, that's all it is.
But you know what I'm saying? I mean, that stuff's puerile, arguably, but it's also fun and it separates your car out from the standard stuff. Now, conversely, this is just like a Q7 or a Q8, but with an extra layer of refinement by virtue of not having a big internal combustion unit chugging away at the front. And that's great, but it's also strangely uneventful. What that also means, of course, is that it's conventionally excellent. Massive boot, loads of cabin space, beautifully put together, same Audi quality as usual, and visually it is smart as and just lovely to drive. Most of the time it's gorgeously refined. You strip away that layer of engine noise from a top-end Audi and of course you're going to end up with something that's dispassionately tranquil. It's like sitting inside an Enya album. It's not flawless though. So like all these big electric cars, it is hugely powerful, as you can see, but it's also very, very heavy, and that of course has an effect on the ride and the handling. So the way this is set up is slightly unusual. It has an electric motor on the front axle and another one on the back, and the back one's slightly more powerful, and then the battery is on the floor in between the two. Now on the one hand, that gives you a rear biased car with a low center of gravity, which should be good for handling, but on the other it's like strapping a flat screen television to the bottom of a hippo. Now, it does actually drive relatively sharply. It has a surprising amount of grip, the turn-in's sharper than you think it's going to be. It's just a little less slack and cack-handed than you think it might be when you start to drive it a little bit more quickly. Some corners, I mean it's an SUV really. It does have lots of grip, but you have no clue where that grip is really going to end, and that makes it a bit scary, although it doesn't really roll as much as you think it's going to. On the other hand, every now and again you get a stark reminder of how bloody heavy this thing is, because it'll thump into a pothole, or it won't quite settle down in the way that a Q7 would. And that sort of bursts the refinement bubble a little bit. This thing actually weighs more than a Bentley Bentayga, believe it or not. And then there's the throttle response, which in my opinion is the most irritating thing about this car. Possibly the only irritating thing if you discount the mirror situation that we went through earlier. So this has driving modes, obviously, because it's a top-end Audi, which includes adaptable suspension that will adjust the ride height. So what this car can do is it can hunker down to give it more aerodynamic efficiency. The problem is, in efficiency mode, the throttle response is so slow. We're talking ITVB target demographic slow.
£1 a week would pay for our university.
Oh, stop it. How many weeks in a year?
52, isn't that?
Right, 52 times, I'll say it's £52.
So you realise that you're in efficiency and it's doing your head in how long it's taking the car to pull away. So you think, oh no, I'll put it in sport mode, that'll sort it out. Problem then is that it just goes to the opposite end of the spectrum. So you get this really twitchy throttle response, you put your foot down, the car just goes ping. Because as I'm sure you'll know, when you've got an electric car, all of your torque is available from 0 RPM. Now that's quite good fun, but also it's clunky during the day-to-day stuff in the opposite sort of way. So then you just end up keeping the car in auto mode, which is kind of a happy medium, but also negates the whole driving modes thing entirely. And then you come to realise that, sure, this car's powerful and it's really quick, but it's not exciting, powerful and quick. Now I know it seems obtuse to criticise this car when it's so futuristic and so clever and it's so actually quick on paper. It weighs more than 2.5 tons and it does 0 to 62 in less than 6 seconds. But compare it to the Tesla Model X, say. Even the basic one is quicker than an e-tron, and that's saying nothing of the brilliantly titled, ludicrous performance version. That car's stats are like Bugatti bothering. And so to come back to what I said earlier, this is brilliant in so many different ways, but it's also strangely difficult to get excited about. I feel like I should be able to recommend a car this clever and this brilliant without caveat. It's so good in such a breadth of areas. It's an amazing feat of engineering, it's supremely refined, it's really quick, but I just wish it had a little more madness with its obvious genius, you know?
Here's Gascoigne. Brilliant play! Oh! Take a bow!
Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and contribute to the discussion below. And if you're especially heroic, please say something really personal and hurtful using an assumed name. And if you do it, you might get on Twitter. I'll see you next week. I'm on holiday, but Dan will be driving a BMW X7. Massive it is. See you soon, bye.